World's Fair's Great Rituals of Self-Congratulation is a brief presentation summarising my study of the World's Fair tradition and its influence on two Australian buildings, the Royal Exhibition Building in Melbourne and the Australian Pavilion in Shanghai. My interest in this topic began in 2010 on a chance visit to the Shanghai World Expo. Being the enthusiastic planning student that I am, I was excited to see how this event entitled Better City, Better Life would address the important issues surrounding urbanisation. However, what I found was far different to my initial expectations. I discovered in this featureless campus of theme park architecture a complex dialogue between a modernising society and an inherent primal urge to boast. The pavilions had, with great success, imparted the utopian ideals of those nations present. However, they simultaneously seemed to communicate a bizarre desire of self-aggrandization, a quality I found spoke unapologetically to our psyche's love affair with approval-seeking behaviour. Perhaps this curious architectural language should not have come as such a surprise to me. Undoubtedly, we as a species have a penchant for bragging. We have been doing it since the socialization of man. However, I was amazed to discover how this human trait had been so craftily institutionalized into a form of architectural tradition. These great new rituals of self-congratulation, as described by historian Eric Hobsbawm, can be traced back to the mid-19th century when much of the Western world were coming to realize the maturity of their industrial development. Such progress was inherently deemed unrewarding in itself, hence was conceived the World's Fair tradition, a platform upon which nations could showcase their innovations and feed their primal urges to gloat. The first of such events was the 1851 London's World Fair. Here nations were given the opportunity to flaunt their new industrial toys, such as the first public toilet and a precursor to the modern-day fax machine. However, it was the venue itself which stole the show. The Crystal Palace, a greenhouse-like structure fabricated from modular cast iron and glass, built to house the entire exhibition, amazed its patrons and drew immense attention from the architectural world. Such fairs immediately became common occurrences, realized as creative new spaces where developments in architecture could be explored and challenged, relatively free of the usual constraints of everyday life, but also outlets in which society could expend some of its pent-up desires to self-aggrandize. In 1880, the colony of Victoria had also come to enjoy an era of prosperity, fueled by the gold rush, and decided it was their turn to boast such achievements on the world stage. As such, Melbourne carried on this honoured new tradition, hosting the Southern Hemisphere's first official World's Fair. To cement the success into reality, the Victorian colony commissioned the construction of the Royal Exhibition Building. Designed by Australian architect Joseph Reed, this UNESCO heritage-listed building took its inspiration from Runboggan-style-styled architecture with a hint of the Florence Cathedral in the pavilion's dome. While the majority of 19th century World's Fair architecture showed hints of looking towards the future, such as the Eiffel Tower's provocative and modernistic design aesthetics, the Melbourne Royal Exhibition Building shied away from this chance to explore new grounds, looking back towards neoclassicism. I would argue, however, it still exhibits this complex dialogue between a modernising society and an inherent primal urge to boast. However, instead of trying to communicate a modern society, I find this building expresses Victoria's desire to be identified as a successful product of Mother Europe, rather than a nation with its own unique identity. During the mid-20th century, the emphasis of World's Fair shifted away from the traditional role of exhibiting one's industrial prowess to events focused on cultural exchange. However, in an increasingly globalizing world where image-based trade and tourism have become so prominent, world fairs became hijacked as avenues for strategic national branding. The Australian Pavilion, built for the 2010 Shanghai World Expo, is one such product of this new branding culture. Designed by Wood Marsh, this building was about developing a complex relationship with China, now our biggest trade partner. The use of corten steel used on the pavilion's outer skin speaks to this quite shamelessly, representing the significant trade relationship between companies like BHP, who gain the most from Australia's future trade with China. But it also buys into the image of Australia as a desert, an image most of the world readily associates with the country. The weathered corten steel portrays images of Uluru. Interestingly, as the finishing touches were being applied to this pop art structure, a 50th anniversary edition of Robin Boyd's influential book, The Australian Ugliness, had been released. This coincidence in timing makes me wonder how Boyd, with his strong views regarding the disease of featureism, would respond to a design built in a featureless campus of theme park architecture. In conclusion, I believe the language of self-aggrandization is of particular significance in reviewing World Fair's architecture, and is particularly prevalent in the two Australian buildings discussed here today. Both of these designs speak to our nation's identity, representing what we are as a nation on an international stage. However, like other World Expos, I feel as though they also provide a unique insight into our nation's psyche's love affair with approval-seeking behaviour, reflecting a quality we as Australians so often try to suppress.